Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode. We're here today. Today, we're going to talk about an article from CNN about 3D printing for human organs, an incredibly interesting topic, as well as bring on 3D printing for asteroid mining, one of the important parts for putting the factories together necessary to work in deep space, as well as a commentary, and we're going to have a little conversation about the 45th anniversary of the moon landing. But I'm here today with Josh Weinberg, regular guest and almost co-host at this point, Joshy. So we're going to start with the question, as we so often like to do. And today's question for you to start with, although I'll answer as well, is what is your favorite alien?
And you're asking me in terms of uh, aliens that have been conceptualized on screen or in books, yeah?
Well, sure. I want to. I have a lot of interest in like the implications for the biology of aliens and how
Right.
different like how life could actually exist in different planets and different atmospheres and different environments. So if you want to get a little nerdy on me, I'll
Oh, I
definitely
always
throw
want
it
to get
back in your
nerdy.
direction. But if you just say ET, I won't criticize. Oh, actually, I will criticize you because I didn't really like
No,
that
no, no, no.
movie.
I
But
wouldn't dream of saying ET. I actually would say, okay, I'll be honest. My first instinct was to say something like Alien, the actual Alien from, Ridley Scott
mm-hmm.
movie. Because it's this perfect organism, it can't be killed. At one point it goes outside, of the hatch. It's in space and it's completely fine, and it's completely adaptable. Like it's almost like a space cockroach, and that it can live forever and just adapt itself to any situation. So it's very impressive and horrifying for that reason. However,
Just to interrupt you for a second, that pretty much
no, go
means
ahead.
its exoskeleton works as a pressure suit, huh? Because if it
Yeah,
went in space, it would want to basically explode. But I guess
you would want.
having an exoskeleton could be advantageous in that situation, huh?
Well, it's clearly got some kind of skin that's strong enough, or it's made of a material that can hold acid for
Mm-hmm.
blood. So it's clearly strong enough to work as some kind of suit. But yeah, I mean, there's something that's kind of interesting that's really that I've realized recently is there's nothing that says a creature couldn't live in space, and they're finding this out now as they bring things like microscopic uh, organisms, like single celled organisms, and have them like live in space for maybe 7 days before they bring them back inside and see if they're still alive. Um, and they can do, and the reason they've been testing that is because one of the theories for how life emerged on Earth is that it was the same way everything else ended up on Earth, by being hurled through space on meteors and comets
Mm-hmm.
and asteroids. So but without digressing too much, I want to say I think my favorite concepts of aliens was given by Stephen Hawking on a program he did on he did this program on it was either the History Channel or Discovery or one of those programs, and he was just purely having fun with what creatures would look like
Oh,
on
so
all
he
the
was
planets.
speculating. He was speculating on
Yeah,
alien life
well,
himself,
you
huh?
know,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. It's how I was reading this. I was reading Isaac Asimov's chronology of the world recently, which is loads of fun. It's just a history of scientific everything.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying in this book, I think was written in the 80s, late 80s, and he's saying we know it's very unlikely that there's any life that exists in anywhere else in this solar system, and how rapidly or how radically our views on that have changed since then. Because we stopped insisting that all life had to look like our life.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped insisting that, well, there has to be liquid water and oxygen, and there can't be you can't be too close to the sun, you can't be too far from the sun, and it's a load of crap. And now we know that. And Stephen Hawking did this whole program where he was playing with the idea of like, okay, well, what if we had an organism that was basically cloud-like and harnessed and got energy from the lightning storms on Jupiter, in which you have creatures technically living on Jupiter.
Yeah, creatures, sort of gas creatures that sort of billow about, kind of blimp-like or something like that. That's that's a really interesting concept to me too. To be sort of like these, gigantic whales of some kind or something along those lines.
No, of course. I mean, something that would be like incredibly light and just like float on the air, and would there's certainly there are certainly elements aplenty, and there's energy aplenty in most certainly all the inner planets, and even I'm sure there's energy sources on all the planets that we can see.
Well, you brought up a good point too, because I remember learning in school that that basically scientists thought there was no other water in the solar system, or at least there was outside of Mars, because they knew that there was water on the caps, but they didn't think there was any. They didn't think there was any possibility, or at least very little, outside of like Arthur C. Clarke maybe or something like that. And then you get, now it's water on Mars. They're finding evidence of water on Mars outside of the polar caps. Water on the moon potentially, and then Enceladus. Huge ice volcanoes on Enceladus that have heated cores that they think that life might be able to form around, because there's these heat volcanoes deep down in the ocean. And then of course Europa, which has a lot of interesting potential for life, because it's just basically like a big ball of ice that they think also has an ocean underneath it.
Right.
So it's just the more we learn, it's kind of how I feel with this whole we're discovering so many exoplanets outside of our own solar system, and the more we discover that there's actually a lot that kind of seem like ours, that aren't too far off from what we've got here on Earth.
Right.
As well as a lot of other planets that, I think is interesting, and may fall under what I would want to, I think is a really interesting type of alien, is planets that are like really nitrogen, or not nitrogen rich, or really some chemical like barium or something becomes the actual fuel source for some kind of living creature, and you get, you might have a they say silicon based. Like you might have a silicon-based life form, which has been theorized as a way of a type of life form that could survive, or potentially develop, or made out of some other chemical that's just fundamentally different from what we're based on.
That's not carbon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that are still there's planets that are still in the sweet zone that are made of these different chemicals that who knows, like we really don't know what are the limitations of life. We just know what it is on Earth.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think so. You asked me what my favorite alien is. I think I've given you this huge, as I often do, just this huge digression, and I apologize, but I think I'm more excited at the way we have sort of reconceptualized aliens in general, how it's possible, where it was even 10 years ago, it just was not that. 10 certainly, like, but when you and I were in school and when we were in grammar school, like 20 years ago, it just wasn't an option to not have liquid water and to not have ready sources of sunlight and things like that. So
yeah, well,
I'd say that Stephen Hawking program for sure.
Have you seen those photos from Titan? That they landed a rover on Titan not too long ago. Back, I think it was like earlier last year or something like that. And what they discovered was that there was, I think Titan was the one at the end of Gattaca, right? That they were trying to get to?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
I think they were going to Titan.
They found, they got through there was a huge, a really dense, thick atmosphere that you can't see through. So they landed a rover there, something that could take photos. And when they got through the atmosphere, they found that there's rivers there. They were something like sodium chloride or something like that's very much not water. But on the actual, there was on the actual surface of the moon, is the moon of, one of our big gas planets, that it had the same exact formations, canyons and valleys and rivers and oceans and all kinds of stuff like that, just with a chemical that would be absolutely deadly to human beings. So who knows? I
Yeah.
mean, it's arguably a similar environment to our, except their temperature is a lot different.
Well, yeah, but even think of
But
this. Think of this.
mhm.
This is and this isn't even as conceptually bizarre as we've been getting. But think about what life looked like on this Earth, 3.5 to 4 billion years ago,
Mhm.
when this Earth really was what we would consider a hell. You can think of this nice little bacteria, or prior to bacteria. These extremophile type things. Living, backstroking through molten lava and breathing in the methane, just saying, wow, there's nothing better. And they ended up, of course, producing way too much oxygen. And then, there was actually a mass extinction 3.5 billion years ago because oxygen was poisoning the air,
Mhm.
But, and I mean, again, I'm digressing, but the ways that life, I think the most basic notion, or the most like for me as a layman, it seems like the only thing that qualifies something as life is something that can produce its own, that can organize itself in such a way as to and produce its own energy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, whether you're doing that from the sun or from absorbing other things that have produced energy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just need the basic chemicals and heat source, more or less.
Yeah. Well,
Well, so
something that's like
Can I throw
that.
out here? Let me tell you
That
what I think. Speaking of which, let me tell you what I think. I don't know if this is my favorite alien, but this is the one that I most recently, a theory on aliens I most recently heard that I thought was the most interesting, and also a little conspiracy-ish, theory-ish, which I also find interesting and hilarious sometimes. But there's a whole theory saying that, like UFO sightings and everything like that, that it's possible that deep down, like we were talking about earlier, that deep down in the ocean's trenches, that we really can't go down to some of the really deep depths, or the only way to do it is through these incredibly expensive James Cameron funded submarines, basically, that are
right.
specially designed, and you can take these really short trips to the bottom of, to really small subsections of the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
There's a theory that there could be, a intelligent species down there, and because it's so hard. I mean, it's so hard for us to get down there to reach them. Well, that's going to work both ways in terms of the pressure differences.
Right.
There's the conspiracy theory behind it is that they were responsible for the UFOs during World War II because we kept sinking ships that kept hitting them, which it's that sounds completely reasonable to me. That
Oh,
sounds
of
like
course, absolutely.
yeah, it's just logical. Um,
Well, that was
but
actually what the movie The Abyss was about.
I know, and that movie's great. That movie just came out on Blu-ray, I think. I would like to
Really?
see that again, but the idea of parallel evolution kind of running even on the same planet is not so crazy. You know what I mean? Like, if there's an
Well,
area
you know
that's
what?
really
Yeah.
so inaccessible to us that we don't know what's down there, the idea that there may be some form of intelligent life, it's not, it's improbable maybe, but it's not, impossible.
Yeah. I mean, of course, and the I think that's why it's going to be really exciting when, and I do think it is a matter of when, not if, when we find evidence of life on other planets. And I don't think we're going to find civilizations, but I do think it's only a matter of time before we find either single-celled organisms or just traces that there had been single-celled organisms there at one point or another. Because, you got to think that the solar system was all made up of the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The Earth and every other planet, it's all made of the same stuff, and it was all being bombarded with the same stuff for millions and billions of years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's actually more a stretch of the imagination to say that life didn't occur rather in anywhere else. I think whether it's I think we could say that it's the Goldilocks zone that we are in now that allowed it to blow up, so to speak, and end up, and give us the diversity that it has here.
Well, the fact is that asteroids have hit the Earth since we've had life with such an impact as to kick up asteroids from Earth into space. So technically, we've at least sent out what could be the seeds of, whether or not we came from, an asteroid that was seeded from a different planet.
Right.
We've definitely kicked some of those into space too, and we don't know where those may hit or where those may have hit,
Jack,
2 billion years ago.
That's actually really interesting, and I cannot believe I can't believe I never thought of it. No, but I can't
Me, the genius, I cannot believe I've never thought of this.
But that we've already realized that single-celled organisms can survive being out in space, and so it's because there are these people who are really desperately trying to prove that life originated here by coming from asteroid collisions.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that and we know that this Earth has been seriously bombarded, since life existed on this Earth, and so it certainly would have been kicked up into space. And I can't believe I've never heard somebody suggest that some of our descendants, or our rather ancestors, didn't make it somewhere else. But I think before the show, I told you recently that they discovered on Mars for like a few hours a day in the summertime, because Mars has similar seasons to us,
mm-hmm.
and it also has a similar day. I think it's something like 24 and a half hour days. But during the summer, during the day, it can be as much as 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And what they've found is there's actually, for a few hours a day during just a couple of months of the year, there can be liquid water. And it's not liquid like puddles. You won't find like a lake, but it would be more along the lines of like soggy, like sand on the beach,
Gotcha.
Where it's liquid, but it's the ice, the way the
ice that's within the earth and the stone and the rock and all that stuff.
The Martian ground. It's within that, but it softens and it essentially liquefies just for a few hours because
mm-hmm.
it warms up sometimes to that effect,
Yeah.
And we're going back to, you got to find liquid water, and there we found it, therefore we must find life, and while we're able to admit that like liquid water might not be necessary, we're still setting our sights on Europa because it has an ocean, and Enceladus because it has an ocean.
Well, it's just we go for the things that we might as well look for the things that we know helped life here, because they have as much shot of anything.
Well, and you know what I think it is? I
mm-hmm.
think it will be easier for us to identify. I think if it turned out that there were gassed creatures living on Jupiter, chances are we wouldn't even know how the hell to identify them.
Well, that's not exactly true, though, because with a lot of such a hard word to say, spectroscopy,
okay.
We one of the things they're working on and this is especially for exoplanets, is by looking at the wavelengths of the light that comes off of different planets, you may be able to determine whether or not there are things like forests or whether or not there are things like plants on those, just because of the light that the light that kind of thing would diffract.
Right.
I think that's the right word, diffract. But of course, that relies on these having at least a somewhat similar makeup to what we have here on Earth.
Right, but that's just it. Like we there's so much that we would have to assume. There's so much. So the point I was trying to make is, if it is a form of life where life is the definition is simply something that is creates its own energy and moves itself. I think
mm-hmm.
is the even more basic. If it's such that it's not even made up of the same chemical components that we have, that all life on this Earth. I mean, we share DNA. We share something like 50% of our DNA with a banana.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something out there that that shares none of our DNA, that has evolved in a completely different capacity, then theoretically, I mean, we could be staring right at it, especially staring at it from a microscope from here, or a telescope from here or from space even, and wouldn't have the slightest idea that we were looking at something that was technically a living thing.
Yeah. Well, should we move on to our first topic for today?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, let's get on to the. So this is from the article that we shared earlier from CNN, and it's just this is from April, but it's the next frontier in 3D printing: human organs.
And you have the article in front of you?
I do. I'm just gonna read the first paragraph just to kind of use it as a launching pad for us to get this conversation started. But it says the emerging process of 3D printing, which uses computer-created digital models to create real-world objects, has produced everything from toys to jewelry to food. Soon, however, 3D printers may be spitting out something far more complex and controversial: human organs. I love the writing, the newspaper writing, by which I mean I hate it, where it's like just
it's entertainment.
It's I don't know, something about it bothers me, but that's neither here nor there. But basically, it gets into the process they're looking at is more or less using a really delicate, really precise 3D printer to more or less print a goo filled with stem cells into the shape of an organ that's mixed with on a frame, it seems like, or mixed with the actual cells of the organ that the stem cells will then copy and replicate.
Yeah,
and I think so to just but. More or less, the idea is that they could, they says here they can print up a liver in about 40 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liver in 2 hours, and it lasts for 40 days. So it's still not, the technology's not there, but it is, that's crazy though. And this is the type of thing, 3D printing, you hear news about 3D printing everywhere, and you see it everywhere, but this is the kind of thing that you start thinking about these particular applications and then realizing how revolutionary it may actually be.
Right.
Of course, this is combining a bunch of different revolutionary technologies, where 3D printing is actually probably the least complicated of the bunch.
Well, it was, but what it is the doctor on who's actually this article is about, who's explaining it. He really was looking at a printer. I think he said back in around, like in 2000, maybe 10, 15 years ago, he's looking at a printer. And it really just occurred to him that, like, well, what if we take those ink jets and those ink cartridges and fill them with cells, with stem cells, or instead of ink. And that was all it was to it. It was so simple and so silly, but like,
Well, I said I said that the 3D printing is probably the simplest technology from this. The reason I say that is that you can see the picture in this article of the 3D printer, and it basically looks like the M-Bot I bought in the mail from Taiwan that's sitting, it's sitting in my living room right now.
Right.
It's really, it's clear, it's got to have a much finer tip, but other than that, like, it's not that different.
Right.
So
and
yeah,
and they're printing. It's not foolproof. It's not perfect.
Obviously. Oh well, no, this isn't even. They're not even. This isn't even ready to be used in for real human beings yet. It seems like, but
no.
But it's just the fact that they're getting there. The fact that they're getting close.
Well, the thing is that, like, 3D printing first came about in the 80s. In the 1980s is the first time you had something that was like that you had a 3D printer, and it was probably on production lines in like factories and doing some things that were very uninteresting, and it wasn't until it's very recently that they've been using it, that I think they've probably made it much more efficient. And I remember the first thing that, maybe last year or whenever it was starting to be everybody was talking about it, that I first heard about it, the first thing, of course, I was thinking of was, this is wonderful, because if you're in space, if you're on the International Space Station and you need a wrench, and I'm sure that if this is NASA, I'm sure that they've prepared for everything, but if you need a tool, that you can't have. You can print up anything, which means that you don't have to consider every scenario now when you send somebody into space.
Mm-hmm.
If you send somebody to colonize Mars, for example, you send them with enough ink, essentially, that as things come up, they'll be able to do anything.
Yeah, with enough printable metal filament and wood filament and plastic filaments of a bunch of different types and food filaments that they can just feed into a printer.
When these engineers are fighting for real estate aboard rocket ships,
mm-hmm.
because every gram has to be accounted for. Every gram that goes up, every ounce that goes up has to be absolutely necessary, because it requires a certain amount of fuel, to get it off the ground. But if you, I actually had, I had a very interesting conversation with someone who has done work for NASA before, and he was saying that the images that we get from Hubble telescope are not actually the images that are coming from Hubble. It doesn't have the image, essentially the image translator.
Mm-hmm.
It takes all the information and it sends it down to NASA, who outsources to other companies that actually make it a visible image. Because essentially Hubble itself does not need to be able to look at its photos.
Yeah. They don't need the, this ultra high tech, ultra high def rendering technology, equipment that they need. They're like, well, we'll just get a contractor for that.
It's wasted weight. But if we get to a point where all that you need is, you say you launch a 3D printer, and there's another article that you and I were talking about,
mm-hmm.
where they're going to, send these 3D printers ahead to Mars that will print the habitats for us.
Mm-hmm.
Then all you need to do when you're launching is launch a giant jug of, 3D printer ink. I think it's actually like a powder,
Well,
but there's no more argument over, who gets to add an extra ounce to their machine or whatever they're sending,
Yeah, but it's, there's a lot of complications. And this is, I think this is a really interesting topic, is that we've discussed this before, the needs that you would need to effectively mine an asteroid in space. You would basically have to have factories that could work in space relatively unmanned or potentially completely unmanned. And 3D printers would be extremely important to this, because if something breaks, you have a 3D printer to basically make the replacement part, like you were saying. If you're out in space, you can't get replacement parts, and you can't stock a replacement part for everything. But the hard part comes in is, though, if you're thinking of a completely unmanned factory, is that when something breaks down, you don't just have to make a new part. You actually have to have it installed properly. You have to have the other one take the broken part taken out. Right. So there's a lot of, they could be really useful for getting the parts, but then there's a lot of infrastructure that's required to put the parts to good use. And it's just like an engineering, it's a real engineering problem that people are looking at in a serious way. Like for the Mars habitats, like you mentioned, it's the exact same thing, where, if you could get a factory up and running that didn't require anybody, you could just send that ahead of time, let it work for 10 years building your habitat, and then, fly to your Mars condo when you're ready.
Right. I don't think it would even take 10 years. Do you know so I have actually an article here,
mm-hmm.
That's NASA is building robots to 3D print infrastructures on Mars, and I think it can print something essentially the size of a gymnasium. It says 600 square meter house. Excuse me. I'll read the paragraph for you if you give me a second. It's according to Sydney
mm-hmm.
Brownstone at Fast Company. Koshnaviz has been working with a new method of construction called countercrafting, which allows robots to 3D print huge concrete objects such as buildings. Last year, he predicted that his 3D printed concrete technology would be available by 2015, and was able to print the concrete shell of a 600 square meter house in less than 20 hours.
Oh, I think I have read about this guy. Yeah,
This
but
is
it's.
just for citing my sources.
Mm-hmm.
It's Science Alert.
Oh,
Uh,
you're cited. Definitely, Science Alert is going to be happy for the Josh Weinberg bump they're about to get from
well,
this. That's for
yeah,
sure.
you know what? I'm in academia, and I'm programmed to cite
Mm-hmm.
my sources. But it's sciencealert.com, and this is the article. But this is one of the new tools that they're gonna send up there. But
Which is interesting because I think I read about that same technology in an article about 3D printing that house in returns to solving housing crises.
yeah,
Because it's basically you can print a one-story multi-bedroom, or maybe it's a one-bedroom house, but it's like something like it's bigger than a trailer, and you can print that in 20 hours, and it's it doesn't cost a lot of money or anything. And it's like, well, what if you can use these for affordable houses? If you can bring the printer, you can do them, or you can if you can print it and move it, like you can
right,
kind of you could just pump these out all day. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Well, actually,
and
about one per day, a little bit more than one per day.
yeah, but this I think the reason we chose 3D printing as a topic. I mean, we launched into it with the article about 3D printing the human organ because that is, and I think in that article they mentioned this statistic that I think there's 100,000 people a day waiting for a new organ.
Well, yeah, we
Uh,
haven't even touched on that topic of kind of the crazy life saving, the crazy implications for just humanity if we could basically print new body parts when our body parts start failing.
Right, right, absolutely, and I think that's the immediately practical. I think for
Mm-hmm.
nerds like us, we're lucky because um, people fund. It's a lot easier to get funding for medical research than it is to get funding to send nerds to Mars,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're just lucky because we have something now, this 3D printing where we can print up new body parts for people who are have failing hearts or livers or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is going to kind of also produce these kinds of groundbreaking technologies that are going to make settling space and Mars and Europa and Enceladus and all these and just leaving Earth in general going to make it much more of a much more plausible and much more efficient and cheap even.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very exciting for us. And also, let's we should probably mention that if we have, let's couple this with our conversation from last show we did, where we were talking about the little nanomotors and the little things going into the bodies, little single-celled size robots that go into the bodies and remove things like cancer cells or excess fat cells or just sickness cells. So we couple that with growing new organs. And by the way, if a person needs a new organ, they use that person's cells
Mm-hmm.
to as the ink.
Yeah, I
So it's
mean,
not
ideally, you could get away from. You wouldn't have to worry about matching or organs. They could
right.
actually
You're not going to have
perfect the
you
idea
won't
of
have
organs
rejection.
not being
Like now,
rejected.
you can do an organ transplant, and the person can be a match, and everything can look perfect on paper, but you can still you still run the risk of a body rejecting an organ.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's always that risk, even if you do use your own cells, but it's dramatically reduced. So now you have these. Let's synthesize this whole conversation by saying we are 3D. We're moving towards a few. We are 3D printing. Um, 3D printing new organs.
That will then
We
be
are.
protected by nanobots, which will prevent your 3D
We're,
printed organs from getting cancer. I know. It's pretty
yeah,
cool.
and we're living forever, and we're not forever, but we're in this position where we've beyond stretched our average lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
The average lifespan, by the way, the lifespan of the average of human, I think around 1900, and not in the Western world, but in the world altogether, was something like 35 years old.
Yeah, but
Okay,
true. But
now it's
do keep in mind though, because this is something that you hear thrown around a lot, and I think some people don't quite appreciate how much we've cut out of the bottom of that. Where the fact that now it's like three in every 100,000 babies in the U.S. dies, or something like that, where it used to be like 5,000 out of 100,000 babies died that were born upon childbirth. And there's
Yes.
and people dying in accidents, and people dying from polio when they were 11 and stuff like that. That when you look at the stats, a lot of that, how long we live, the average lifespan, comes from cutting out the basically just the people dying young, which
No,
does not
you're
happen
absolutely right.
so
And
much
that's,
anymore.
I mean, obviously, I'm
But
oversimplifying.
yeah, but just because,
I'm
and I just mentioned that
oversimplifying
because I've heard this thrown around a lot. But at the
yeah,
same
no, no, no.
time, like,
But I'm oversimplifying
mhm,
to make the point that we're creating a future where it's going to be significantly more difficult to die.
yeah,
We have, it's going to be a lot easier to, there's nothing that really prevents us from living for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. There's no law of physics against it.
if you got good insurance, you could drink yourself through just like dozens of livers over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, but so which also means that we are fixing ourselves. We're also dooming ourselves with if we think we have an overpopulation problem now, what's it going to be like in a couple of 100 years when people just don't die anymore?
Mm-hmm.
and that will make the idea of colonizing other planets will not just be a fun thing for nerds to think about, but it'll be an actual necessity. And harvesting resources from out of this earth, much more of an immediate necessity. And we will, I think, be lucky in that we have kind of, just by pure coincidence or by pure happenstance, we will have developed the technologies to do that. Just in developing the technologies we're working on now for medical reasons or other reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if it's all right with you, if that helps segue at all into your next topic that you wanted to discuss.
The asteroid mining.
Yeah.
Already kind of been talking about that. I think it's fast, and it is one of the biggest topics in in space travel, and one of the reasons I think that it catches not just the popular appeal, because space people like you and I won't say everybody's the general population, but we eat up science fiction movies and we look at we want to go to Mars and I want to stand on top of Olympus Mons, and I see
Right.
Europa pictures, and I just go crazy.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
asteroid,
Well, you should.
yeah. But asteroid mining is, it's one of the few aspects of space travel that actually appears like it could have a short term, really high return on investment if it was pulled off properly, which
Yeah.
is not so obvious in other forms of space travel. There's long term, like colonies and things like that have long term advantages. But if you rope in an asteroid full of just diamonds and gold, you've basically hit jackpot. I kind of wanted to bring it up because I was reading an article from Harvard that is titled "Few Asteroids Are Worth Mining," suggests Harvard study, and it basically goes on to say that there's of the, rocks in space, a lot of the rocks in space turn out to be just rocks in space, not filled with plutonium or
Unobtainium.
silver or unobtainium. Yeah, it's just our unobtainium resources have gotten low, and the Navi were really that whole situation kind of blew up in our face. So so we're looking for other sources. I was kind of confounded by this article in that, it felt like one of those things where they were completely right while still kind of missing the point. Where they are right that, statistically speaking, not a lot of asteroids are actually filled with platinum and stuff. But the point is, you only need one, because one has more. Some of these, some asteroids that are in the zone that they're looking to actually capture them from. May have more of certain of these metals than we actually have in all of Earth. Some of these rare earth metals and things like that.
Right.
Actually, I don't know if rare earth metals is actually one of those. But so I see this as more pinpointing your target and pulling it nicely rather than because if you're doing this, you have to pull an asteroid after asteroid to guess which one has valuable metals in it. You're probably doing it a little bit wrong. You're probably taking the wrong approach.
Well, do we have a method or has anybody even conceived of how to look at asteroids from far away and determine what they're made of?
I have to look into that. I know that there are, because there's really good ways. Um, I mean, one of the things we famously do is we've actually hit asteroids with things, and we've landed little rovers and things on asteroids. So, I mean, I assume one of the ideas, if you're going to actually pull one into our atmosphere or pull one into our orbit around Earth, is you'd want to land something on it first to make sure that it actually has what you think it has.
Right.
Other possibilities comes up is you can somewhat determine where the metal. Oh,
That was my dog. I apologize.
what's your dog's name again?
Minerva.
Oh, Minerva. Oh.
Yeah. I have I have two dogs here. I have Themistocles, who's the big one, and Minerva, who's the little one.
Yeah.
And they are howling.
It says here that deep space industry plans to use low-cost spacecraft called Fireflies and Dragonflies to reconnoiter with asteroids and return samples from near Earth asteroids.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say fireflies?
Yeah, called Fireflies and Dragonflies.
Wow. Okay, that's exciting.
So there will be a spaceship called the Firefly that runs that'll go back and forth between asteroids to run samples back to Earth.
Well, that's pretty damn amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that itself seems like a pretty costly process, and not only it's costly in terms of money. We have to spend the money and the resources to launch something, and then we have to wait for it to go get samples and come back.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's going to have to come up with a system, or a way of looking at asteroids to see if this one is worth going after. Because I think you're right. I think you've made a good point that this, of all the kind of space travel that we talk about and all the reasons why space travel is so important, overpopulation and resources out there, mining asteroids for kind of precious metals and things like that is the one that would be in the short term the most profitable.
Yeah, you can point to it and say, look, like, there's your money right there.
Right.
And to be fair, it's pulling if you successfully mined some of these or one of these, it could effectively just do everything from completely solve all of our resource problems, or basically solve all of our resource problems except for certain ones caused by like infrastructure and distribution.
Right.
And basically just radically change what we have here on Earth, over a long range. I guess that's what people are saying. I don't know what it actually means. I mean, there's the comparison is always made to the Spanish, after they conquered the Americas, or invaded the Americas and brought back boatloads and boatloads and boatloads of silver. They crashed the silver market. So, and they famously said they ended up bankrupt because of it, even though they were the ones who brought back all the money. So it's, there's an analogy there, which is, if we bring back more resources than we've ever had access to in human history in one shot, what is that gonna? I don't know if there's a really good model for what that would actually mean for for humanity.
Well, no, we have to reinvent new models. For one thing, well, there's a couple ways to respond to that. One, I can say is, how much can you possibly carry down? How much can, it's not like you can grab an asteroid and just hurl it towards Earth. I think, because we've, even if it's full of diamonds or full of, whatever, of everything that we could possibly want, the consequences, I'm pretty sure, ask any dinosaur will be pretty disastrous if we
Well,
just bring it down to Earth.
what I would do, and I read this plan before, is you put it in orbit around Earth, and then you can basically build a space station on it, or build a
Right.
mining operation on it that just sends ships down. It sends cargo ships down to Earth.
Well, here's the thing though about that, and that's actually what Obama has approved. By the way, I think Obama approved something that's well, it's just that project to go capture an asteroid and bring it and put it around put it in orbit around Earth. But then the idea is, think about the diamond market.
Mm-hmm.
Diamonds are not rare, and we I mean diamonds aren't rare at all by any means, but the few people that control it, they release little bits on the market at any given point, so that they can so that they can make it so that they can make it worth more. But I mean, I'd like to see. Forgive me. I'm looking up this exact article on Obama doing the asteroid capture, because I think you're right, that it's something that we can make money on immediately. But I don't think that it would be this. I think that the people who did it would it's not going to be something where they're going to capture an asteroid. It's going to have everything that we need. They're going to put it in orbit, and then they're going to flood the market with everything, and we're all going to be screwed. I think it's going to be more along the lines of, we find a new source, the same way when we find new sources of oil. We start drilling. Only this way we'll be able to just go to space.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's just a complete net positive. I mean, someone is going to get rich off it when it comes in, but hopefully, as a result, then building, steel becomes 10% the price of what it is right now, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. Here's what I was, what I was gonna get at is that this happens all the time, where something, we strive for. We think about it like this. Originally, the only oil that we had available to us was whale oil, right? And it was a booming industry for people to go out and find what's scarce. I mean, it was a scarce source.
Mm-hmm.
They had to go whaling to get enough, oil to light a few lamps for, for a few months maybe. And then of course people started started being able to, use fossil fuels and drilling oil, and it changed. So you say well, now all that oil wasn't worth nothing, but no, it's just that the industry changed completely.
Well, yeah, and I can see this as this type of thing that if we get good at this, who knows, 100 years down the line, and we're bringing in our 10th asteroid or something like that, we may look back to the days when we drilled into and built huge pipelines that went across all of Russia, and be like, holy shit, that was inefficient. I can't believe did Grandpa actually use oil that came out of the ground?
Dead dinosaurs? Your grandpa used dead dinosaurs? Yeah, I think, and I think that's true. I think the idea is always to strive for. I think that a good philosophy of life, and I hate using that term, by the way, to say a good philosophy is, but I think the appropriate way, rather, to look at the world is always to look at every innovation as both a, as both something as simple as a spoon, and also as the Hubble telescope. Look at every innovation that's amazing, and be able to see that it's amazing and wonderful, but that we could still do so much better that it will be laughable.
Well, and that brings up a philosophy of life of mine, which is, if something's as awesome as taking an asteroid out of its orbit and bringing it to Earth, you kind of just got to do it.
Yeah. Well, think about all the things that we've done in this world
Mm-hmm.
throughout human history for no reason other than we can.
Yeah.
And we were just honestly, you know, the Apollo mission was us just whipping it out for the Soviets. That's
Yeah.
all it was.
Yeah.
And
Well, think about it. This isn't
things happen as a result, you know.
And this isn't even. This is not even, like discovering relativity, because this isn't. This is basically, it's an engineering and money problem at this point. It's not, it's not like we don't need the breakthrough the breakthrough scientific discovery that will allow us to mine an asteroid. We just really need to get like top notch, engineers working on this for a long period of time. There's a lot of work that probably needs to go into, I'm sure that needs to go into this. But, theoretically speaking, everything about this is doable, which is cool. And actually,
Yeah.
On the topic of space travel, let's get to our final topic, which is the 45th anniversary of the moon landing.
Yes, yesterday was the 45th.
Yeah. I was not born when the moon was landed on.
No,
I read that apparently only about 20 to 30% of Americans watched the moon landing, but about 50% of Americans say they saw it on TV. So it's important enough that 30%, that a good chunk of Americans lie about it.
Yeah, I believe that. It's really somebody. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday because we were, talking about it for obvious reasons, and he made this. He was reading. He had read this article about, all the hype about faking it. The conspiracy that we faked it, and the big joke was we were so ill prepared for going to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We had nowhere near the right kind of the appropriate amount of technology to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, if you took all of the technology that was in Houston and in the Apollo spaceship itself and put it into a phone, it would be like a 1998 Nokia.
Yeah, I think it was like, yeah, and it wouldn't even play Snake, right, or something like that.
No, it was absurd. And the joke that this article was saying, fake the moon landing. We didn't even have the technology. We didn't have the special effects to fake the moon landing. We went anyway.
Yeah.
But like that actually cracked me up. But that was the reason. And that's, by the way, the only reason we went we got to the moon before the Soviets, because the Soviets said they weren't going to go until they knew for a fact that they would be able to bring the person home safely.
And so we said, hey, we're Americans. We just need the first part of that. We just need to get there. We'll figure it out from there.
No, and it's so funny how much we downplay how many people died not going to the moon.
Yeah.
This is not Apollo 1 or even like 2 or 3. It was Apollo 11 that finally made it,
Well, it's not like the other Apollos all blew up or something, but
No, but it was I mean,
yeah.
No.
But it was but
if you talk to astronauts, I don't remember if it was, I don't think it was Buzz Aldrin. It was an astronaut I was watching this interview with from I think maybe the last, or no, from one of the first. What was the Apollo mission that just went before 11? That went around
10?
Sorry, Apollo 8.
Oh, 8. Okay. I don't know the timeline of all the Apollo missions, but
no. Apollo 8 went. I think they went to the moon. They didn't land on the moon. They went and just flew around it to look at it. And one of those astronauts was saying, it was common knowledge that being asked to join the astronaut program was a good way to have a real short career.
Yeah.
But you said yes anyway. And this is the kind of like the cowboy spirit in, America.
Well, it's like it's the John Wayne, like, it just be a badass and go for it, I guess.
But, I say that, but I immediately, and I say that a lot, and I always take it back immediately, because I think it is very intrinsically human to do something that we know is dangerous for the sake of what might be awesome.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. I mean, we're always trying to jump off. I feel like human beings are always trying to jump off like bigger and bigger cliffs to, especially if there's like, there's a girl watching or something like that.
right, well, we
Um,
test our limits, but honestly, like, and you can think about it in terms of, and I actually do, and I don't know if I've even if I have, I apologize profusely if I've said this on the show before, but I always think about going to the moon the way we did, or the Apollo missions in general, the same way I think about the first proto humans that harnessed fire, and I think about it like this because you know we can reasonably assume that it was not some prehistoric man that decided to rub flint together and make fire, but rather he saw a brush fire, and when every animal knows you see fire and you go away because fire bad.
mhm.
But some asshole said, really? Said, do I have to? And like, how many, and said, said to himself, can I use it for something? Can I do something with it? I'm just curious, just this kind of curiosity about it.
Mhm.
How many proto humans burned to death horribly for the sake of, who knows, for the sake of nothing other than, can I do anything with that? It looks kind of cool,
It feels
you
kind of
know?
warm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, it's an audacity. Human nature can be characterized by this horrible arrogance and audacity
Mhm.
that says, you know what? I got an idea. I'm going to strap myself to millions of gallons of combustible liquid. I'm going to light a match, and who knows? Either I'll die horribly, or I'm going to go to the fucking moon.
It is the glorious stupidity that is one of the best aspects of the human race. I'll
Yeah,
definitely agree with that
it's what
with
you
you on
love. It's
that.
what you love and hate about us at the same time.
It's like if you
Because
look at the
just as
history,
easily,
if you look
it
at the
can just
history,
as easily produce a Buzz Aldrin or a Neil Armstrong or a Howard Hughes for that matter, or these kinds of crazy people as it can a Dick Cheney.
mhm.
Because it's the same kind of fuck it attitude.
Well, if you look at the history of the airplane too, which is pretty fascinating, leading up to Kitty Hawk and the Wright brothers and all that, for years and years and years and years before that, kind of the proto airplanes were all gliders, and people were inventing all kinds of different designs for gliders that they would then test by just trying to glide them off a cliff, and
Right.
like a crazy number of these people died, like just going
They
off
were
these
jumping on
cliffs. They were
cliffs.
just literally jumping off cliffs with their prototypes of their flying devices before the airplane was invented. Like somebody looked at a kite and said, "Oh, that flies. Maybe I can strap myself to one of those and fly too." Like that's
Right.
where they're coming from. And people kept doing it, and eventually you get the 767 or whatever that we have today, and it's pretty amazing.
Right. Oh no, it is, and and what's I we'll save this topic for another day, but there was an article about basically speed trains that they have in Japan, that because they don't use because they operate in tunnels, they built this kind of tunnel. There's no wind resistance, and they were working on this technology to be able to get something up to like 5,000 miles an hour. Getting people from New York to China in 2 hours. And it's like, we're going to see that in our lifetime too, and it's going to
Yeah.
be, people are going to say, "Oh my God!" They're gonna the same way we look at people who like took covered wagons to get west. They're gonna look at us and say, "You sat on planes for 15 hours just to go shopping in Tokyo?" Like,
Yeah, I know.
it's great.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's wrap up this episode. It's we're getting right to the end here. Do you have any shout outs or plugs you want to make before we call tonight?
Um, no. I think that does it. I think the only shout out is keep listening to the show, because I think there's I'll give you a shout out. I'll say if you click like on Facebook on things like I Fucking Love Science or Discover Magazine or Science News, the more of these things you like, the more your Facebook feed will be flooded with things you actually want to see and not photos of your high school friends' kids. So
I'll add on to that, and I'll say, if you're going to click on science that you want to click on, not science that you feel like you have to click on.
Right.
There's a lot of very well intentioned sort of, I don't know, like science to support this or to something that, and it actually ends up being a lot more political than it is scientific. And
Right.
I think that, and that has its place, but it's, I think we're straying away from the cool stuff. I want people excited about science. So,
Right. And
if you
you know
just
what?
see like
And
that
it should
an awesome
be said.
photo of Jupiter, just put it on your Facebook or something. Just get people stoked on the cool stuff.
Yeah. No, and it should be said that, like, look, okay, you can feel like, all right, I want to donate to Mars One, for example, which, by the way, I think everybody should even, give $1 to Mars One. I think they're doing something amazing. And, but you might want to say, like, okay, but if I have $1 to spare on that, then I should really be giving it to, medical research or cancer research. But it is all feeding into each other. So if you are giving, if they are advancing areas in, advancement in one area in science, really it will always mean good things for other areas in science in ways you can't even predict.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about today.
And passion, that's how I feel about passion in science. Passion in science just create, it just multiplies itself.
Well, you know what? Actually, there was an episode of Cosmos where they were talking about how they first dated the Earth, by looking at the rate that uranium decays into lead, or
okay,
something. I might have gotten that backwards, but just by looking for the date of the Earth, and this is recent. This is in like the 70s. He found the professor, the scientist who was in charge, found that we were poisoning the air with lead, and he ended up in this decades-long battle with the government and with the oil companies, and it's why we have unleaded oil now. It's why we have unleaded at the pump. So, this is a guy who was just trying to find out how old the Earth was, and he could very well have said to himself, yeah, but there are much more nobler causes I could be devoting myself to. But look what he did. He saved generations from lead poisoning. So
you never know. So, yeah, it's just
follow your heart.
Agreed. Well, Josh, thank you for coming on again. It's been a pleasure, and we'll catch up next week then. All right.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack. We'll
Quantum Institute signing out.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.